or just a gentle stand, or if you would like to chat, maybe head out to the sidewalk. It's a beautiful day. Bobby, can you gather the folks at the back of the room there to... Everybody, we're going to start our next amazingly titled presentation. I've been excited about a lot of these, but this title has got me just sort of quaking with anticipation. Come have a seat, or if you want to chat, go out to the sidewalk. It's a beautiful day. But that's totally cool. We believe in freedom of communication and whatnot. Bobby, you want to say something?
I was going to roast Daniel for...
Yeah, roast him. Let's get him up here.
Just wanted to acknowledge... I just wanted to acknowledge both everyone's stepping into this interdisciplinary Goldilocks zone. And who better to tame the massively multidisciplinary complexity of our context than someone who has spent a journey on taking our situational awareness and making that a form of agency for us in each contextuality we are in. I want to acknowledge that art influences systems change, and systems change influences art. And when I heard the video that's linked to from this artist, we had this amazing context of Buckminster Fuller and William Blake and how these lives are portals to each other that I heard when when this was presented in Daniel Friedman to the Buckminster Fuller Institute Society. And I just want to acknowledge that there is so much complexity to navigate in this world, and there are few humans on Earth who have found more of a graceful, integral, coalescent journey of how that complexity can be tamed, and we can have collaboration across disciplinary lines be in profound consequences than Daniel Friedman.
That's a good intro. And now to the speaker. All right, thank you everyone for joining really cool activities. I'm glad that people have joined. So, I'm going to be talking a little bit, and we'll all be talking together about three main things that are just going to come up and weave together. That's William Blake and Bucky Fuller, two entities which I'll bring some experience to, and solar punk and futures. So that is where I think at any point, if somebody wants to bring up an idea or a question, just raise your hand or make some other strange bodily position. And here I brought together, since there's not just a dyadic juxtaposition of Blake and Fuller, but also the bringing in of the futures, I thought, well, what is our triple helical weave? And there is the famous Gödel Bach book cover with the wooden sculpture that illuminated three ways reveals the initials of the book. And also just memes of change. Now it might seem a little bit too early to already go off course, but when I was doing some primary meme research, and I was thinking, well, where does that right turn exit meme come from? It turns out there's a real movie, but it's harder and harder to know these days. But it turns out that in the original movie, which I've lined up at the same moment as the famous meme, this is actually totally photoshopped on. And it's not even like an airbrush situation. It's literally just a disconnected picture, but this thing, which is not an overpass, ends up blending in. So I just thought it was kind of interesting and funny because the meme would have you think that the turnoffs and the bifurcations and the critical points are labeled, but that's actually not really true. So that's just a little random note. One of the primary themes that I think brings these all together is the line. It's a simple concept, but it's one that has a lot of richness and depth to it. And this is a website with a URL sort of delightfully obscured, but it's from the blog of Alec Navala Lee, who most recently wrote this biography of Fuller, inventor of the future. And this was a page on Navala Lee's site where he brought in the quote that I was seeking from Blake. And the quote is here, and I'll just read it. The great and golden rule of art, as well as life, is this, that the more distinct, sharp, and wiry the bounding line, the more perfect the work of art, and the less keen and sharp, the greater is the evidence of weak imitation, plagiarism, and bungling. What is it that builds a house and plants a garden, but the definite and determinate? What is it that distinguishes honesty from knavery, but the hard and wiry line of rectitude and certainty in the actions and intentions? Leave out this line, and you leave out life itself. All is chaos again. Why was I seeking for the line? And here with another meme. On the left is a common way that this meme is shown, and it's reflecting all these adjacent pasts, counterfactuals that could have been differently, and that one green, wiry bounding line that traces us to go through the needle of the present. And then all of these branching points, so whether you're programming and it's an action selection model or a chess model, or you're just doing strategy or planning. And so wiry bounding lines in the past and the future. And then I found this variant of the meme. I hope you can kind of see this is where these talks and research avenues mainly stem from. With the same green wiry bounding line in the past, but instead of a tree bifurcating out into the future, it's just a cone. It's just like a haze. And so I wondered, in light of Bucky Fuller's critical path concept, if life's path is carved out from death, so non-existence, as well as alternative paths, if the path in actuality will come out to have been wiry and bounding, then why is it that the fog of futures to come looks more like this blur? And there's some footnotes there for those who want to explore that a little bit more at the technical wavelength. But for here, the way that the rest of the time is going to proceed is I'll bring up some points of contact between Fuller and Blake as part of a bigger question of how does the past and the thoughts of the past come through how we are here and into what on one hand seems sort of like a San Francisco fog, but on the other hand is made up of these definite possibilities. So, on the left, a little snapshot of a knowledge graph, again, for another time, but for those interested in knowledge engineering, AI, other topics, there's a lot of cool stuff that we can explore with Solarpunk, and just triple helices there, out there. Okay, so again, at any point, anyone can raise their hand or I guess just rush the stage or something. And there's going to be on each slide Blake on the left and Fuller on the right. And I think between the two of them, we will maybe see a third space or a gap between them where the present opens up. Okay, so on the top is a timeline. The two fellows that we're talking about are William Blake and Buckminster Fuller. Blake is born in 1757, Fuller in 1895, and they lived extremely different lives. I won't go into reading every detail on these slides. Happy to share them with whomever would like to read more. So I'm just going to try to find one salient similarity or difference between these fellows. I think one of the most interesting pieces is that Blake lived essentially his whole life within a few miles of London, never left the UK, whereas Fuller was all about how there was just exponentially more travel and how he went around the world and how in his own lifetime the car was taken from something that was sort of a fringe, like the gasoline horse, all the way on through people driving everywhere. So where does that fit in now, where so many of the trends around movements and where our bodies move and where information moves, those are happening in ways that the sort of letter writing culture of Blake and the telegraph and telephone culture of Fuller, they didn't really see. About their practices and professions, well, we heard in the previous talk, and I'm sure many places elsewhere, about how technology influences our jobs and our work and our livelihood. And despite their vastly different sources of work and income, they shared working across different genres and different formats that were important in one moment might be put aside for years and then brought back years later. But both Blake and Fuller were enormously productive across these different media formats. Fuller perhaps having a little bit more resemblance to the technical and the intellectual property and the construction, all these kinds of things that he's very well known for, like geodesic domes and whatnot. But also easy to overlook that William Blake worked in many artistic formats and ways as well. Going a little deeper into the ways that these fellows created, they have both spawned cultures, fractal subcultures, that on the academic, on through the engineering and the humanities sides, people still engage in their work, even myself excluded. There are biographies and scholarship of both them, not that just more words make their productions meaningful, but there is so much richness in even logos and short writings. And so again, like as we look around this room and we think about the different ways that the people here and that the artists might work on the screen, on the page, and off. Maybe it's something that seems like a side note or an annotation or marginalia, but that might be something that in the times to come is seen as very rich and doing something with art and in a context that just making all of the combinations of words in the world didn't quite yield. So, but again, if anyone has like a thought or an idea of where does the past in general, or where do these fellows fit into how the aesthetic we see and what we're exploring here?
New housing.
New housing.
Dymaxion house. We need a new Dymaxion house.
Cool. I think making livingry will come back. But yes, Blake didn't engage in civil engineering type projects in the way that Bucky Fuller did. Full page creativity. It's very fascinating how both of these fellows worked in a full page format. There isn't really much wasted room. You can visit the Bucky Fuller archives at Stanford University. Anyone can visit. You can like request seeing primary materials, or you can look through the illuminated manuscript pages of Blake. And in basically every case, I mean, down into the corners, every single place, every nook and cranny, there's always more context, more labeling that can be added. And in a very interesting way, it's kind of like this cryptographic integrity on their works, because once we realize that Blake wasn't just composing words, for example, or Fuller wasn't just composing drawings, they actually were being presented in this sort of unified format with the semantics and the syntax together. So yeah, we could transcribe what's in that cursive off of the page, and we could put it in one font or another, but we would then have to go back to the original. Was that a comma or was that a period? And so it's like there's this primacy of the original artifact that we can even directly link back to their hands, and that gives a kind of complete sense of the page being full. But the page being full is just like the exoteric side of what led to the page being full being off the page. And so they both, again, in really different hands and really different reasons why. They both compressed a lot onto the page, and it's something I see in basically all the art pieces here. Not a lot of borders around the images, a lot of rays and branches tracing right up to the edge, and that's like our kind of call to continue it. Also, the previous speaker highlighted like the future of the internet in the context of whose voices was there or not, and calling for the voices of children while there was a little pep crying somewhere in the room. Both Blake and Fuller highlighted the role of children in constructing the future. And again, there's a lot of like text and details here, but here's a nice quote on the top right. Again, another person weaving together Blake and Fuller even outside this presentation. So this is Ed Applewhite, who was Fuller's co-author in Synergetics. And Applewhite wrote, "On the opening page of Synergetics, Fuller exhorts the reader, dare to be naive. Similarly, in speaking, he tended to address professors as if they were 9-year-olds and 9-year-olds as if they were professors. This is a strategy that was anticipated by William Blake, who liked to think that his works were perfectly comprehensible to the innocent, to minds not blunted by education and fashion, especially children." So that's kind of this paradox with the naturalness of learning and the ways in which somehow through time we pick up what the new normal is. And as we again look around at the art pieces directly here and just sort of their broader reference, are these concepts that are too technical, they're at the end of a legacy education and then maybe you'll get to them, or there's something that's esoteric or oblique? Or are these cultural themes and ideas related to community and place that would be like, you'd have to be educated out of thinking this way, and it's something that you could just sort of like take a breath and in a moment dispel other educations and get down to just a hands-on understanding of what? This Fuller's Earth also, and there's a children's book that Fuller wrote, and a book about a day that he spent with some children. Symmetry. Again, I'm just trying to bring in that thirdness of the art on all the walls around us and thinking like, well, what are the symmetries and the balances that we see in the art here? How does that contrast when we walk back out onto the street? What kinds of geometries and symmetries do we see? What makes it an art shown here and a different visual aesthetic than what we see, again, just anywhere? No casualties. Okay. Thank you. An art show is sort of the perfect place for some of these visual themes that are shared and differ between Blake and Fuller to come out. People here are interested in something artistic happening, and again, it's just the triple braid is like the two friends that I have brought to the party, and then our own experiences, and maybe the fourth of the arts on the walls. So it's like, what symmetries do we see in the art that we like? And symmetry comes up in a very technical way in Fuller's work. Those who are even very familiar with the symmetries of tensegrity and the geodesic domes may not necessarily be familiar with synergetics and a lot of the deeper work in geometry. And likewise, Blake, even though on a first pass people might think that poetry has little to do with symmetry, Blake may have written the most famous poem about symmetry ever with the lines, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?" Though the tiger itself doesn't look so fearsome, it's not dissimilar to some of these faces and forms that we see, and that tension in nature with the stunning symmetry of like lungs, brain, trees, etc., and yet no straight lines and differences in nature as well. This is getting into some very interestingly similar points between Blake and Fuller, and ones that are not always brought up. They both emphasized fourness and had, in their own different ways, a fourfold vision. So for Fuller, a tetrahedron, or call it what you want, is sort of a key mnemonic that brings together a lot of the work. And also Blake talked about a fourfold vision, and again, would leave it to those to explore more, but broadly, the scientific or the technical vision is considered a sleep. It's Newton's single sleep. So again, in the previous talk, it was about Shakespeare and there was Newton. And it was sort of provocatively put that AI and other techniques could yield some of the scientific insights or technical insights, and yet without an artist making a given piece of art, that art wouldn't exist. And so as we think and rethink the nexus of the scientific and the artistic and all of this with AI and whatnot, the fourfold vision concept of Blake, or actually the technical vision, is just like looking through the microscope or the telescope, and then the poetic vision is the twofold vision, and then the mystical vision is the threefold vision, and the fourfold vision is sort of like a total even beyond that vision. So, just some interesting ways in which the geometric mnemonics of Fuller and the way in which the tetrahedra as the minimum space enclosing system gets woven into everything that he does, and so many other practical implications coming out of that. And then convergently and earlier, Blake also focusing on this fourfold coherence. Negations and contradictions. I'll just read it highlighted from Blake on the top left. Negations are not contraries. Contraries mutually exist, but negations exist not. So this is the difference between convex and concave, which always come into arising at the same moments, and sunny and not sunny. Two things that negate each other, but they don't both exist. Either one or the other exists, in contrast with the contraries, which exist at the same time. And Fuller also wrote about many of these concepts and sort of summarized it in his famous unity is plural and at minimum two. So I think there's probably a lot of ways to go with solar punk from there, but thinking of what does pluralism mean? What is radical pluralism? Where even at a root layer, there would still be a unification and a compositionality. These are some of the ways in which differences can be taken as contrary, but not negations of each other. Though they both expressed their work and their words in their own due time and ways, there was also some really fundamental groundings for both of their work, because they often brought it back to just the direct sensory experiences. So whether this is Blake's famous line, if the doors of perception were cleansed, that led to Huxley's doors of perception work, or whether it was Bucky Fuller's focus on the directly apprehendable educational experiences for children, whether his conversations with Marshall McLuhan and the connections with media is the message, or the way in which Bucky looked at what was being rapidly discovered about the electromagnetic spectrum and then saw that as sort of calls for the reinterpretation of, well, if we're only seeing these narrow bands of reality from a spatial and temporal perspective and from a frequency perspective, like what is really going on. And Blake's not going to go into the wavelengths of light per se, but again, these themes are apprehendable even without knowing exactly how many nanometers of whatever go into this color or the other. So it's just kind of interesting that by grounding art in direct sensory experience, there's something that goes beyond even just a vertical transmission of cultural symbols and grounds in something that is more like regenerating freshly every single person's life. Okay, about their worldviews in terms of how they view the world, and again, also differently than how we might see the world. Here on the bottom left is a famous Blake line. The man looking down at the paper with the compass is emblematic of that Newton's single vision. It's like the geometer sketching out these artificial lines on paper as being what they are, but in a way only being what they can be at the exclusion of the natural world all around. And then on the bottom left, striving with systems to deliver individuals from those systems. And that's sort of this paradoxical with them or against them question that Blake dealt with. And Fuller, in the spirit raised earlier of the transition from weaponry production to living reproduction, here's a aircraft delivering a just-in-time constructed dome, and also in the spirit of providing alternative systems and tools, not just making this some kind of rhetorical, convince the mind to act differently, but just provide the means of differential action. And it's like, how many times do we hear about the different continents or the different distortions of land masses on the Earth? But then how many times is that followed up by like, and then here's the map that doesn't have that. It's like brought to the point of tension or of negation or of critique. And then that is what could be just the opening appetizer to a different way of working that would have ameliorated the tension. But instead it feels frustrating, like frustrated geometry in a way, because it's like recognized in its limitation, but then when there's, oh, well, it sucks that we have to use this digital platform this way, and it's like, that should be an impetus to have it be built differently, but just living with the tension that it is not what we prefer is kind of like, it's a frustrating state. Both Blake and Fuller had very intense faith experiences. Here, it's an interesting question. I think definitely one for us to discuss, however people see fit. But what are the roles of different people's loosely or strongly held beliefs about these art pieces? And is it cool if I like that art piece and you don't, or what do we do about that, and how does that connect to the symbols that are out there now? And then sort of coming to the end, here's both of their gravestones. Similar gravestones in a way. So Blake's chosen engraving was, I give you the end of a golden string. Only wind it into a ball. It will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. And Fuller made the short quote, call me trim tab. It's written there twice on the main part and on the bottom part. And the trim tab is the rudder on the rudder. So when there's not enough force to even turn the rudder, so if the ship is to turn right, the rudder is to turn left, but then the trim tab is to turn right. So there's kind of this double nesting, and the way that the trim tab goes is the way that the ship goes, but it's mediated through a rudder which goes a different direction. So those are all the slides, and I guess we return to this central point and the image of the line, which is that whether we're tracing with an etching in wood like Blake, or whether we're cutting away with acid like the infernal method that Blake used, or it's an engineering drawing like Fuller, or it's critical path by Fuller, taking the idea of a line or a path into a more like project planning way of thinking. It's been like a line for us to get where and how we are, and it's going to be like some other line, but yet when we look forward, we don't really see that per se. So I guess at that point, wherever people have any questions or ideas, I would love to hear it. So thank you.
I have just a quick clarifying question, and you probably can chime in on this one, but critical path as it pertains to like the construction industry. I just heard this term recently on a project we're working on, and that sort of like, what do we absolutely need next to move forward? Is that the same thing we're talking about? That was a Buckminster Fuller creation and like a process, or were those two different terms?
I don't think he invented the term critical path, but it is in that sense. Like it's the Gantt chart, and during the phase of the industrialization and the scientific approach to management that he was very familiar with, what is the critical path by which spaceship Earth gets trim tabbed through living reproduction towards a situation that works for everyone? Those are like kind of just like little beads of Fuller memes, but reading through his texts and everything I know and all of the interviews and things like that, it's just like one after another. And so that's kind of like each of these fellows and each, artist, they have their toolkit. And Fuller's was not just uniquely coherent, as Blake's was mythologically, but also Fuller's has a really operational focus, because it actually picks up with like project terminology. So that's what kind of makes it beyond just an aesthetic and take on and connect with like a really pragmatic side.
I just want to say I really appreciate what you spoke about, the importance of balance, and how like you kind of use the visuals on the wall to kind of describe like the need for balance that we have in this world. Because honestly, when you think about even politically what's going on in the world, like there's this political pendulum that sort of swings back and forth, right? You have the left, and then you go to the right, and I know we had a black president, African American president, that was, and and it was backlash, and I think right now we're going really far to the right, when the left and on the right. So I just want to say, I really appreciate you acknowledging the balance that we all need in our lives. I think mentally, and also I think in the political world. I just, there's so many mental health struggles in San Francisco right now, and I think balance is sort of what we need right now. I just read an article about she was Amanda, she was I think she was a sheriff in Golden Gate, the Golden Gate Park. I'm a social worker right now, and like she's helping the homeless right now, and they're actually living very connected to nature right now. And I feel like it's their need to find equilibrium. Their need to like escape whatever trauma that we're all living with, to try to get in touch with what used to be really normalized, which is our roots with nature. And I don't even know if this sorry, I'm like, it's just and I know her anyways. It's okay. I'm just kind of blabbing. But you said the balance, and I really appreciate that you say that, because I feel like we're kind of off balance. And I feel the pendulum is swinging in a political world that I think everybody in a way needs, but it's, okay, anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for sharing.
You. Okay.
For me, I was just looking at it actually because I was sort of, William Bright was actually living exactly the time that railroads were expanding across, England, and that sort of transformation was in process. And Buckminster Fuller was experiencing the post-war growth and the expansion of, you said car networks basically, and so the interstate. And so this massive change in the way the world was going on in the background or in the foreground of what they were dealing with. And I think that has resonance to today because we feel that same dislocation, that same sort of opportunity as well, but just like that seems to resonate for me.
Yeah, thank you. Like Blake writing about the satanic mills and about the chimney sweep and all of this stuff that was happening with mechanical industrialization.
Yeah.
Then Fuller into the era of logistical industrialization and transit, globalization, and then now in this sort of informational and cognitive industrialization phase with both excitement and, but I was pushing this cart for my PhD, and now we don't need to push carts anymore. So then, why did I push that cart? But then, who would I have been if I didn't? So,
Yeah. So.
thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I came a little late, so I missed, unfortunately there was a lot of traffic, but something that really resonated was, you mentioned the geometric, the unfinished sacred geometry or unfinished geometric shapes. And I want to connect that to the critical path. It made me think that, similar to what Ray Dalio says in the book Principles, where he goes back and forth and like what went wrong and how can we make it better, and it's like a constant reiteration. How can we maybe we have to think in sacred geometry and in geometry like in life terms. Like when we look at nature, like an unbroken piece is kind of like something dying. Or homogeneous geometry is like a dead mineral, even though it has energy, but maybe it's more homogeneous, whereas life is super complex geometry. So maybe every step along the way in the critical path, we should think of geometry as something like we have to think about life in a poetic way, but also like in the sense of the goal of the project. So like how can it be more morally good for, not just for me and the client or the end goal, but like kind of Father said, for everything and for God.
Can you summarize that? It's hard to hear.
That was a great question. What is the role of geometry and life? How is it related to life? How do we reconcile the seemingly abstract, eternal, unliving, solid geometries with our natural form, which seems to have very little to do with the fact that the tetrahedra has 3 times the volume of that, and this has 3 times, all these details of geometry. Oh, those are great questions. That's like why I love to juxtapose the cosmic hierarchy and the sacred geometry with the fearful symmetry of the tiger. Because, okay, well, tigers are bilaterally symmetrical, but then are they even? I mean, their heart's on one side and the fur might be different on both sides. Yeah. But there's so many more things to say about how does synergetics and geometry play out, and people explore like social synergetics, and we have 4 people, and you think about it in terms of the tetrahedra, it doesn't necessarily have the edge lengths being even, but it still is a tetrahedra.
It's like the geometric basic sacred geometries are like the base or the seed, and then life is like incredibly complex. It has like a million of those shapes and many of them, different types. And if we can think in that sense in every step of the way, then we're getting somewhere, I think.
That makes me think about like a field of trees. Every single tree's branching is its wiry bounding line, and no 2 are going to have the same branching pattern, but if you were to superimpose all of them, you would get that blur again. So yes, when is it like a softness of a blur, but then when is it the wiry bounding line in actuality? Okay, one last question.
So actually, I have two quick questions. One quick question, which is, have you written this up somewhere, or do you have this material in a book or on a website, or is that in the works? Because it was fascinating. My second question is, you've probably sometimes wondered what Fuller and Blake would have to say to each other if they were contemporaries, or if they could talk. And I realized that you could experiment with that and have ChatGPT have them have a conversation and ask some questions that you really wondered what they would say to each other in answer to. Have you ever thought about doing that?
Okay, so the first one, yeah, there's probably some websites and places online to learn more, but not so much written, but you know, maybe some of us should. Yeah, and then using language models or our imagination models, definitely a lot of funny things. It might be super mundane, like Bucky just rambling and Blake being broody. I don't know. or maybe they would have a great time, and you know, it could go a lot of ways though. But thanks again.
Amazing.
Day Sanchez is coming on up. We're just going to roll right into it because y'all are so attentive and here and present. So one more question for the transition. How did you choose these two? Were they just always your top two in life, or did you have a whole, I'm just curious about this particular pairing, like for your story, and how that might relate or not to solar purification.
I had always really liked both, and then when Fuller's new biography came out, The Inventor of the Future, then I realized, he has the chronophile, and Fuller has all of this personal information. Similarly with Blake, we don't have that much material to go off of, but also there's been many biographies, so that kind of set me down a path of reading many Blake biographies to complement reading the Fuller biography, and then just seeing that despite certain non-overlaps, there were certain massive parallels that were just too interesting to ignore.
Cool. Love it. I just wanted to thank so much Daniel Friedman for sharing this integral perspective. I find that having folks who have tamed complexity in the course of a radically integral journey is a scarce, precious, and marvelous thing. So thank you for the magic